Okay, I know it's been a while since I put out a video, but I've been busy. If you're curious to know what I've been up to, I will link to some of the music projects I've been doing in the description below, but that's not what this video is about. This video is a follow-up to a video I put out almost a year ago regarding the 10 stages of genocide. And although it's much drier than my usual stuff, and there's not even any math, it was generally well received, apart from all the commenters insisting that actually the real genocide is against Christians. The video was so well received, in fact, I literally met someone in real life who recognized me from that video. I'm like an internet micro-celebrity now. But anyway, we've got business to discuss. I wish I didn't live in a country that would require an annual update on its forthcoming genocide, but here we are. Now, I'm not going to re-explain the 10 stages. If you need a refresher or you didn't see my first video, you may want to pause here and check that out first. Briefly though, according to a model of genocide developed by Dr. William H. Stanton with his nonprofit Genocide Watch, there are 10 stages of genocide: classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, denial. So everything up to stage 3 should be granted by this point, and if you don't agree with that, I don't know, maybe like pay more attention to state legislatures.
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. The whole preposterous ideology at every level.
Okay, we've got a prominent conservative pundit at the largest conservative political conference loudly announcing that we need to eradicate transgenderism. Seems pretty unambiguous, but let's play devil's advocate. He didn't say eradicate transgender people, just transgenderism. Yeah, fair enough, but like, if he said eradicate Judaism rather than eradicate Jewish people, would that be any better? Not really. And even if he's not directly encouraging violence, he's clearly advocating for the state to criminalize being transgender. And you've got his colleague, Ben Shapiro, repeating the social contagion talking point. And again, to be fair, social contagions are a legitimate sociological concept. But given this guy's general disdain for trans people, it's not too much of a stretch to think he is deliberately using the word contagion to describe trans people as diseased. And just in case it needs to be said, the social contagion hypothesis has been debunked. All the medical evidence suggests that being transgender is not a social contagion. After it was revealed that the Nashville shooter was transgender, we saw an uncharacteristic fascination with the shooter's identity. Outlets like Fox News and the New York Post made the shooter's transness central to the story. And there was even a popular talking point that transgender people were overrepresented among mass shooters, because there may have been 4 over the past 5 years. Well, here's a reminder that there are, on average, more than 1 mass shooting every day in the US. So, just to be clear, the majority of US mass shooters are cisgender men. And speaking of media obsession with transgender people, did you hear about the transgender marathon runner who finished ahead of 14,000 women? I mean, she came in 6,000th place, but still, clearly worthy of national news attention. And to be fair, this did occur in London, but it still received widespread coverage in the US. And then we've seen what could probably be described as the normalization of literal genocidal language. This tweet from a 7th grade teacher got nearly 3,000 retweets before her account was suspended. The tweet reads, "I don't condone Nazism, but maybe the mustache man was onto something. Maybe we need to bring that tactic back, but not towards the innocent Jews for following their religion, but on trans for following pedophilic lifestyles." And then here we have a successful MMA fighter just asking a question. And the question is, would you support public executions of anyone who helps a child transition? This would include doctors, therapists, teachers, guidance counselors, etc. As an educator who has worked with transgender children, this would probably also include me. And oh look, another right-wing pundit just asking questions immediately following the Club Q shooting in November 2022. Here's Tim Pool tweeting, "The grooming of children is not stopping. People are calling for more violence. I do not think legislators will stop the grooming. People will not stop calling for violence. So you tell me what happens next." Okay, we're done with dehumanization. I mean, we're not done with it, but I've included all the examples I care to. So let's move on to organization. Much in the way that dehumanization is broadly characterized by hate speech, organization is when we start to see explicitly violent behavior. The Dylan Mulvaney story is a pretty stark example of this. And it's one of these things where the response was way bigger than the event itself, so you may have missed it.
Hi! Impressive carrying skills, right? I got some Bud Lights for us. So, I kept hearing about this thing called March Madness, and I thought we were all just having a hectic month, but it turns out it has something to do with sports. And I'm not sure exactly which sport, but either way, it's a cause to celebrate. This month, I celebrated my day 365 of womanhood, and Bud Light sent me possibly the best gift ever, a can with my face on it. Check out my Instagram story to see how you can enjoy March Madness with Bud Light and maybe win some money too. Love ya! Cheers!
And here's the response.
Let me say something to all you and be as clear and concise as possible. Fuck Bud Light and fuck Anheuser-Busch. Have a terrific day.
Let's be clear, Anheuser-Busch has had hundreds, maybe thousands of celebrity endorsements, but a single endorsement from a person who happens to be transgender, and that's enough to make some transphobes lose their mind. A couple days after announcing her Bud Light sponsorship, Mulvaney also announced an endorsement deal with Nike by modeling some leggings and a sports bra. Again, just some pretty innocuous, run-of-the-mill sponsored content, but yet that's still enough to spur boycotts and criticism from country musicians, conservative pundits, even a US senator. And I already mentioned it in the last video, but white supremacists continue to threaten LGBTQ events. Here are some neo-Nazis staged outside a drag brunch in Columbus, Ohio on April 29th. And that brings us to polarization, wherein state or other actors try to systematically separate the outgroup from the rest of society. The most egregious example of this is the Missouri Attorney General's emergency order deeply restricting gender-affirming care for all people, including adults. For a person to qualify for gender-affirming care, this order requires that they have 3 years documentation of long-lasting, persistent, and intense gender dysphoria. And if you don't know anything about gender-affirming care or healthcare in general, that might not seem like an unreasonable standard, but let's switch our perspective a bit. Imagine you have severe clinical depression. You sleep all day, you can't eat, at times it makes you scared to leave the house. But unless you've had 3 years of documented, long-lasting, persistent, and intense symptoms, you are unable to be prescribed an antidepressant. Clearly, that is an absurd barrier to construct. The order would also deny gender-affirming care to anyone experiencing any other mental health issues. So if you're trans, but you happen to also have depression or OCD or autism, you are disqualified from gender-affirming care. The order also denies care if it is determined that the patient is experiencing social contagion, which again is just totally unrelated to being transgender. And while it's obvious that this order will prevent new patients from receiving care, it's important to recognize that it will also disqualify patients who are already receiving care, in effect forcibly detransitioning much of Missouri's transgender population. Fortunately for Missouri, the emergency order has been blocked by a 21st Judicial Circuit judge, who wrote that plaintiffs have met their burden to show that they will be subjected to immediate and irreparable loss, damage, or injury if the Attorney General is permitted to enforce the emergency rule. Tennessee was the first state to pass a drag ban in March of this year, although this ban has also been temporarily blocked by a federal judge. And yeah, there's some plausible deniability here. What does a drag ban have to do with a genocide against transgender people? Drag is an art form, transgender is an identity. But given, everything, it'd be silly to pretend the two issues are unrelated.
But the good news is that as of June 2nd, Tennessee's drag ban has been ruled unconstitutional by a Trump-appointed federal judge.
The reason the Tennessee drag ban was blocked is because the language is too vague. The law works by defining adult cabaret entertainment to include, among other types, male and female impersonators, and then to ban that adult cabaret entertainment from public property or in a location where it could be viewed by a person who is not an adult. Now, given the fact that some people use groomer and LGBTQ interchangeably, it's not too much of a stretch to think that an ill-intentioned prosecutor or judge might include all transgender people as male or female impersonators. And if that's the case, are transgender people just not allowed in public? Now, I acknowledge that that's a very cynical interpretation, but this is all part of a nationwide pattern. In addition to Tennessee, North Dakota passed a similar law in late April. And of course, Texas, Arizona, Kentucky, and Montana are also considering drag bans. And oh, speaking of Montana, their state legislature is also trying to ban gender-affirming care for minors, and so one of their House members responded to her Republican colleagues by saying, "I hope the next time there's an invocation, when you bow your heads in prayer, you see the blood on your hands." As a result, the Montana House voted 68-32 to bar Representative Zoe Zephyr from the House floor, gallery, and antechamber for the remainder of the legislative session. Republicans kicked a transgender lawmaker out of her duly elected seat because she vocally opposed legislation which will almost certainly lead to the death of transgender children. And if you think that's hyperbolic, here's another state legislator from Montana explaining the Republican perspective.
One of the big issues that we have heard today and we've talked about lately is that without surgery, the risk of suicide goes way up. Well, I am one of those parents who lived with a daughter who was suicidal for 3 years. Someone once asked me, wouldn't I just do anything to help save her? And I really had to think. And the answer was no. I was not going to give in to her emotional manipulation because she was incapable of making those decisions, and I had to make those decisions for her.
This publicly elected Republican doesn't care if her own child dies, as long as they're not transgender. Okay, that was rough. So let me give you a bit of good news. People don't want this. Only 1% of voters rank wokeness and transgender issues as their #1 issue. And much more tellingly, 86% of voters believe it's a problem that families with transgender children are the targets of political attacks. There's power in numbers, and as of right now, the people who want trans people to have human rights have the numbers. If you're curious how such a vocal minority is able to maintain power despite overwhelmingly unpopular policies, you can check out my video about just that thing. Now, if you've gotten to this point in my 2 videos and you're still not convinced, honestly, I get it. Genocide is a huge word. But I want to borrow a quote from the Auschwitz Memorial to reiterate the exact same conclusion from my first video. When we look at Auschwitz, we see the end of the process. It's important to remember that the Holocaust actually did not start from gas chambers. This hatred gradually developed from words, stereotypes, and prejudice through legal exclusion, dehumanization, and escalating violence.
Okay, so what can we do? You should stay informed on current events in your state and local community. You should be educated on things like trans rights, trans history, and gender-affirming care. You should talk to your family and friends to discourage the acceptance of propaganda. You should participate in direct action. You should call your state and federal lawmakers. You should be donating to local charities and mutual aid organizations. And you should just give money directly to trans people. Seriously. This kind of direct support is one of the most effective ways to help trans individuals. Thanks for watching.